The ground is not supposed to move like this. For 11 centuries, the massive triple-layered walls of Constantinople stood as the definitive edge of the world, an immovable barrier against the chaos of the unknown. But today, the dust rising from the horizon carries a vibration that the city's foundations have never felt. It is a low, rhythmic thrumming, the sound of 80,000 boots marching in unison and the heavy, metallic groan of something being dragged through the Thracian mud. This is not just an army, it is a funeral procession for an era. High atop the ramparts, Emperor Constantine XI watches the sun dip below the Golden Horn, realizing that the light of the Romans might never truly return. The silence that follows the sunset is the most terrifying thing he has ever heard. It is the sound of an empire holding its breath, waiting for the first spark to ignite the end of history. The air inside the city has grown heavy, thick with the scent of old incense and the cold dampness of stone that has seen too many winters. In the narrow alleys, the whispers are louder than the prayers. People speak of omens, of the moon turning the color of rust during the recent eclipse and of strange, flickering lights dancing over the dome of the great cathedral. The conflict is no longer just between two powers, it is a friction between 1,000 years of memory and a future that refuses to be ignored. On one side stands a man burdened by the ghosts of Caesars, clutching a crown that has lost its shine but none of its weight. On the other, a 21-year-old visionary named Mehmed, who views the world not as a collection of legends, but as a mathematical equation to be solved with fire and iron. The walls were built to withstand the rage of men, but they were never designed to survive the birth of a modern kind of power. Outside the gates, the young Sultan watches his engineers work with a cold, calculated precision. They are not merely soldiers, they are architects of a new reality. They are tending to a monster made of bronze, a weapon so vast it requires 60 oxen to move and hundreds of men to feed. This is the Great Cannon of Orban, the equalizer of history. It does not care about the sanctity of the city or the lineage of the rulers inside. It only understands the physics of impact. The Sultan knows that the walls are a physical manifestation of a stubborn dream, and he has brought the hammer to wake the world up. The tension between his ambition and the city's endurance has reached a breaking point, creating a psychological vacuum that is sucking the very oxygen out of the air. As the first light of dawn breaks on the morning of the siege, the silence is shattered. It is not a shout or a trumpet blast, but a roar that seems to come from the bowels of the earth itself. When the great bronze weapon speaks, the sky turns black with smoke, and the very air ripples with the force of the blast. Inside the city, the shockwave travels through the soles of the citizens' feet, vibrating up through their bones. The first 1,200-pound stone that hits the wall does not just chip the surface, it causes the ancient masonry to weep dust and lime. This is the sound of history being crushed under the weight of the future. It is not a standard explosion, but the agonizing cry of limestone and mortar as it yields to a force it was never meant to comprehend. For the first time in a millennium, the inhabitants realize the impossible is happening, their shield is cracking. Inside the Blachurny Palace, the maps are laid out, but they offer no comfort. Constantine moves his pieces across the parchment, but his hands are steady only by sheer force of will. He is fighting a ghost. The struggle is not just against the soldiers outside, but against the creeping realization that the world has moved on. The harbor is blocked by a massive iron chain, yet reports reach him of the Sultan's ships being dragged overland on greased logs to bypass the defenses. This tactical nightmare creates a sense of suffocating entrapment. Every choice the emperor makes feels like a compromise with fate. If he stays, he risks being the final name in a book that has been written for 15 centuries. The friction between his duty to the past and the survival of his people creates a dark atmosphere that no candle can pierce. He looks at the purple silk of his sleeves, a symbol that once commanded the known world, now feeling like a leaden shroud. The siege is not a singular event but a slow, agonizing erosion of hope. Days blur into nights, punctuated only by the rhythmic thumping of the batteries. The city has become a sensory trap. The smell of sulfur hangs over the markets like a fog. The sound of hammers frantically repairing the breaches at night provides a desperate counter-melody to the Sultan's drums. In the dark corners of the taverns, men talk of secret tunnels and hidden betrayals. The threat is not just outside the walls, it is the suspicion that the exhaustion of 1,000 years might finally take its toll from within. The uncertainty is a poison, moving through the streets faster than any plague, turning neighbor against neighbor in a frantic search for meaning in the encroaching darkness. Every shadow in an alleyway becomes a potential omen, every whispered conversation a plot. The Sultan, meanwhile, experiences his own form of isolation. He sits in his tent, staring at the silhouette of the Hagia Sophia against the starlit sky. He has staked his entire reign on this gamble. His advisors whisper of retreat, of the dangers of a European relief force, and of the shifting winds of fortune. The internal conflict of a leader who must project absolute confidence while standing on the edge of a precipice is a heavy burden. He knows that if he fails to break these walls, his own legacy will be erased before it even begins. He is not just fighting the emperor, he is fighting the weight of the legend that surrounds the city. He must prove that the new world is stronger than the old, or be consumed by the shadow of his own ambition. The bronze monster at his command is hungry, and if it is not fed with the city's stone, it will devour his reputation instead. In the final week of May, the sky itself seems to join the psychological assault. A thick, unnatural fog rolls in from the sea, swallowing the masts of the ships and the tops of the towers. The sun becomes a pale, sickly disk, providing no warmth. In this gray limbo, the defenders begin to lose their sense of time. Is it morning? Is it the end? The bells of the churches ring out, but the sound is hollow, a plea sent into a void that no longer listens. The emperor makes his rounds, his armor scarred and his face a mask of exhaustion. He sees the eyes of his men, they are no longer looking for victory. They are looking for a way to endure the inevitable. The tension has transitioned from a sharp fear into a dull, heavy ache that resides in the marrow of their bones. The night of May 28 arrives with an eerie, calculated calm. The Sultan has ordered total silence in his camp. No fires, no songs, no clashing of steel. This tactical quiet is more unnerving than any roar. It forces the defenders to listen to the sound of their own hearts, to the creaking of the wooden gates, and to the soft lapping of the water against the sea walls. It is the silence of a predator just before the spring. Inside the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia, the last of the candles are burning down, their flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows against the ancient mosaics. Here, the final contrast is most striking. Nobility and commoners stand side by side, their titles rendered meaningless by the looming disaster. The profound stillness inside the cathedral, filled only with the soft weeping of the faithful, stands in terrifying opposition to the mechanical growl of the cannons waiting just beyond the gate. The final assault on May 29, 1453, begins not with a bang, but with a surge in the pre-dawn gloom. The masses move forward like a tide that cannot be turned back. The conflict reaches its absolute peak as the steel of the new world meets the stone of the ancient one. There is no room for strategy now, only the raw, desperate struggle for every inch of earth. The narrow gaps in the walls become funnels of chaos, where the air is thick with the scent of iron and the sound of frantic breathing. It is in this moment of total collapse that Emperor Constantine XI makes his final choice. He does not retreat to a hidden bunker or seek a glorious, visible death on a pedestal. Instead, he reaches for the fastenings of his regalia. He casts aside the purple silk, the jeweled ornaments, and the golden eagle. He strips himself of the identity of a Caesar and becomes a nameless soldier, a ghost among ghosts. In the dim, smoky light, he vanishes into the fray, becoming a part of the very dust he sought to protect. As the sun rises over the city, it reveals a landscape that has been irrevocably altered. The Great Gate of St. Romanus has been breached, not by a single grand gesture, but by the accumulation of relentless pressure and the changing tides of warfare. The silence that follows the final breakthrough is the most profound of all. It is the sound of 15 centuries of Roman history coming to a full stop. The footsteps of the Sultan as he enters the city echo against the marble floors of the palaces, marking the beginning of a different story. The old world has not just been defeated, it has been translated into something else. The tension that had held the city together for so long has finally snapped, leaving behind a vacuum that will take centuries to fill. The golden dome that once represented the center of the universe now reflects a different sun. The aftermath is a study in shadows. The libraries are scattered, their secrets catching the wind and drifting into the sea like autumn leaves. The statues of the old heroes look on with sightless eyes as the names on the street corners are changed and the echoes of the past are muffled by the bustle of the new administration. The conflict has ended, but the danger remains in the way the world must now reorganize itself. The fall of the walls is a signal to the rest of the continent that the old certainties are gone. The horizon has expanded, and with it, the potential for new, even more devastating clashes. The silence is not a lack of sound, but the heavy realization that the past is a foreign country to which no one can return. The maps must be redrawn, but the ink is still wet with the blood of the transition. In the end, the story of 1453 is not about the stones or the gunpowder, but about the fragile nature of everything we believe to be permanent. The walls fell because they were symbols of a world that had stopped growing, while the power outside was fueled by the restless, volatile energy of the future. The thriller lies in the moment of transition, in the terrifying space between the last breath of an empire and the first cry of a new age. As the smoke finally clears over the Golden Horn, the city remains, but its soul has shifted. The dark corridors and the ancient vaults now hold new secrets, and the echo of the great bronze weapon continues to vibrate through history, a reminder that nothing, no matter how magnificent, is ever truly safe from the march of time. We build our fortresses out of stone, forgetting that time is the ultimate acid. The legacy of that final night is a haunting quiet that still seems to linger in the corners of the world's great cities. It is a warning that the structures we build to protect ourselves are only as strong as the ideas behind them. When the ideas change, the walls will always follow. The Sultan sits upon the throne, but he knows that he is now the one who must build, the one who must defend, and the one who will eventually face his own horizon. The cycle of rise and fall continues, a dark tragedy played out on the stage of human ambition. The silence is never truly eternal, it is simply the pause before the next great storm begins to brew in the distance. The ghost of the nameless emperor still haunts the breaches, a reminder that when the end comes, we all return to the same earth. As the years turn into centuries, the memory of the collapse remains a jagged scar on the collective consciousness. It serves as a testament to the fact that the most dangerous moment for any system is the moment it believes itself to be invincible. The conflict between the old and the new is a permanent feature of our existence, a dark thriller that is rewritten with every generation. We walk the same streets, look up at the same stars, and wait for our own walls to tremble. The lesson of 1453 is not found in the maps or the dates, but in the feeling of the ground moving beneath our feet, reminding us that the edge of the world is always closer than we think. The vibration hasn't stopped, it has simply moved to a frequency we have learned to ignore, until the next bronze monster arrives at our gates.
What is this sorcery?
The transition was not just political, it was intellectual. The scholars fleeing the fallen city carried with them the seeds of a rebirth elsewhere, proving that while walls can be broken, the ideas they house often escape into the wild. This scattering of knowledge ensured that the fall of one center would lead to the rise of many others. The tension between the lost past and the emerging future created a spark that would eventually light the way for the modern world. Yet, the cost was the total erasure of a specific way of life, a reminder that progress is often a predatory force. The city, renamed and repurposed, became a bridge between two worlds, but the bridge was built over the bones of those who refused to let go. Looking back at the ruins that still stand today, one can almost hear the rhythmic thrumming of the Sultan's army. The stones are weathered, not just by the elements, but by the memory of that final, devastating impact. They serve as a mute warning to all who believe in the permanence of their own walls. The dark thriller of history does not end with a resolution, it ends with a transformation. We are all living in the aftermath of someone else's collapse, walking through the corridors of empires that once thought they were eternal. The silence of the sunset over the Golden Horn is still there, waiting for the next era to hold its breath and wait for the spark. Ultimately, the fall of Constantinople teaches us that the greatest danger is not the enemy at the gate, but the stagnation within. The walls held for 1,000 years because the people believed in them. When that belief was met by a new, more aggressive vision of the world, the stones became nothing more than a physical hurdle. The physics of power dictated that the more rigid structure would eventually shatter under the pressure of the more fluid one. The story of 1453 is the story of that shattering, a moment of profound darkness that nevertheless paved the way for a new kind of light to enter the world. It is a cycle as old as time, a rhythmic vibration that continues to shake the foundations of our own world, reminding us that the ground is always moving, whether we choose to feel it or not. The weight of the empire did not vanish, it transformed. As Mehmed II walked through the gates, he did not just see a conquered ruin, he saw the capital of a new age. The mosques that rose where churches once stood and the bustling trade that filled the ports were not signs of death, but of a fierce, vibrant evolution. The city became Istanbul, a crossroads of continents where the memories of the Caesars lived on in the architecture of the sultans. The danger of the siege gave way to the complex, shimmering reality of a global power. History did not end on that May morning, it simply turned the page, proving that even the darkest thriller eventually leads to the dawn of a different day. The ghosts still walk the walls, but they are no longer mourning. They are the silent witnesses to the fact that every ending is merely the soil in which the future takes root.